Okay, the ad break has finished, so let's go ahead and get into it. Hey everyone, Pike Snail 68 here, and welcome to today's stream. Cat fact of the day is the cat's front paw has 5 toes, but the back toes have 4. Some cats are born with as many as 7 front toes and extra back toes, which means they are polydactyl. Huh. Is that how you spell polydactyl? I didn't know that. I thought it was spelled more like pterodactyl. Anyways, so today it's going to be a very chill stream compared to what I usually do. This is the start of what I'm going to be calling Sunday book clubs, book club Sunday, something like that. Where basically I just read a book for a stream instead of playing any particular game or anything like that. We're going to be hanging out in my apartment here in Final Fantasy XIV, just for the ambiance because it's supposed to be a cafe slash library themed apartment. So, and we obviously have fitting background music for the book we're going to be reading today, which is. Hold on, what year did this come out? I'm gonna hate myself when I see this. Ugh. Set the fucking bookmark down. Uh. Okay. Sorry, sorry about that. Was talking to the family about something. Anyways, today we are going to be reading the 2007 book, Mass Effect Revelation by Drew Karpyshyn. I probably butchered the pronunciation of his last name there. But yeah, this book served as a prequel to the original Mass Effect. I think it came out before the game actually did, if I recall correctly. So yeah, let us go ahead and just get into it, really. There's not much here. See, that's a dedication to his wife. Acknowledgements for the game and the devs. Oh, those are FC buffs running out there. Need to wiggle my mouse a little so that the screen doesn't dim. Okay. Prologue. Approaching Arcturus, disengaging FTL drive core. Rear Admiral John Grissom of the Alliance, the most famous man on Earth in its three fledgling interstellar colonies, glanced up briefly as the voice of the SSV New Delhi's helmsman came over the shipboard intercom. A second later, he felt the unmistakable deceleration surge as the vessel's Mass Effect field generators wound down and the New Delhi dropped from faster than light travel into speeds more acceptable to an Einsteinian universe. A ghostly illumination of the familiar red-shifted universe spilled in through the cabin's tiny viewport, gradually cooling to more normal hues as they decelerated. Grissom hated the viewports. Alliance ships were purely instrument-driven. They required no visual references of any kind, but all vessels were designed with several tiny ports and at least one main viewing window, typically on the bridge, as a concession to antiquated romantic ideals of space travel. The Alliance worked hard to maintain these romantic ideals. They were good for recruitment. To people back on Earth, the unexplored vastness of space was still a wonder. Humanity's expansion across the stars was a glorious adventure of discovery, and the mysteries of the galaxy were just waiting to be revealed. Grisham knew that the truth was much more complex. He had seen firsthand just how beautifully cold the galaxy could be. It was both magnificent and terrifying, and he knew there were some things humanity was not yet ready to face. The classified transmission he had received that morning from the base at Shang-Chi was proof of that. Hello, VCR. Oh, hello, Nesto. Gee, I wonder why you both showed up to my stream at the exact same time. Let me actually open my water bottle. Be good to have that on hand while I'm streaming, or while I'm reading, I should say. Okay. In many ways, humanity was like a child, naive and sheltered. Not that this was surprising. In the whole of humanity's long history, it was only in the last 2 centuries that they had broken the bonds of Earth and ventured into the cold vacuum of space beyond. In true interstellar travel, the ability to journey to destinations beyond their own solar system had only been made possible in the last decade, less than a decade, in fact. It was in 2148, a mere 9 years ago, that the mining team on Mars had unearthed the remains of a long abandoned alien research station deep beneath the planet's surface. It was heralded as the most significant discovery in human history, a singular event that changed everything forever. For the first time, humanity was faced with indisputable, incontrovertible proof that they were not alone in the universe. Every media outlet across the world had jumped on the story. Who were these mysterious aliens? Where were they now? Were they extinct? Would they return? What impact did they have on humanity's past evolution? What impact would they have on humanity's future? In those first few months, philosophers, scientists, and self-appointed experts endlessly debated the significance of the discovery on the news vids and across the infonets, vehemently and sometimes even violently. Every major religion on Earth was rocked to its core. Dozens of new belief systems sprang up overnight, some of them based on the tenets of the interventionary evolutionists, who zealously proclaimed the discovery as proof that all human history had been directed and controlled by alien forces. Many existing faiths tried to incorporate the reality of alien species into their existing mythologies. Others scrambled to rewrite their history, creeds, and beliefs in light of the new discovery. A stubborn few refused to acknowledge the truth, proclaiming the Mars bunker a secular hoax intended to deceive and mislead believers from the true path. Even now, nearly a decade later, most religions were still trying to reassemble the pieces. The intercom crackled again, interrupting Grissom's thoughts and drawing his focus away from the offending viewport and back to the shipboard speaker in the ceiling. We are cleared for docking at Arcturus, ETA approximately 12 minutes. It had taken them nearly 6 hours to travel from Earth to Arcturus, the largest Alliance base outside humanity's own solar system. Grissom had spent most of that time hunched over a data screen, looking through status reports and reviewing personnel files. The journey had been planned months ago as a public relations event. The Alliance wanted Grissom to address the first class of recruits to graduate from the Academy of Arcturus, a symbolic passing of the torch from a legend of the past to leaders of the future. But a few hours before they were about to depart, the message from Shanxi, they always pronounce it different in the games, I've noticed. Shang-Chi had radically altered the primary purpose of his trip. The last decade had been a golden age for humanity, like some glorious dream. Now he was about to bring a grim reality crashing down on them. The New Delhi was almost at its destination. It was time for him to leave the peace and solitude of the private cabin. He transferred the personnel files from the data terminal to a tiny optical storage disk, which he slipped into the breast pocket of his Alliance uniform. Then he logged off, pushing himself away from his chair and stiffly standing up. His quarters were small and cramped, and the data station he'd been working at was far from comfortable. Space on Alliance vessels was limited. Private cabins were typically reserved exclusively for the commanding officer of the ship. On most missions, even VIPs were expected to use the common mess or the communal sleeping pods. But Grissom was a living legend, and for him, exceptions could be made. In this case, the captain had generously offered his own quarters for the relatively short trip to Arcturus. Grissom stretched, trying to work the knots out of his neck and shoulders. The Admiral rolled his head from side to side until he was rewarded with a satisfying crack of the vertebrae. He made a quick check of his uniform in the mirror. Keeping up appearances was one of the burdens of fame, before stepping out of the door to make his way to the bridge and the bow of the starship. Various members of the crew passed in their duties to stand at attention and salute as he marched past their stations. He responded in kind, barely aware that he was doing so. In the 8 years since he had become a hero of the human race, he developed an instinctive ability to acknowledge the gestures of respect and admiration without any conscious awareness. Grissom's mind was still distracted with thoughts of how much everything had changed with the discovery of the alien bunker on Mars, a line of thinking that was not surprising given the unsettling reports from Shang-Chi. The revelation that humanity was not alone in the universe hadn't just impacted Earth's religions, it had far-reaching effects across the political spectrum as well. But where religion had descended into the chaos of schisms and extremist splinter groups, politically, the discovery had actually drawn humanity closer together. It had fundamentally united the inhabitants of Earth, the swift and sudden culmination of the pan-global cultural identity that had slowly but steadily been developing over the last century. Within a year, the charter for the Human Systems Alliance, the first all-encompassing global coalition, had been written and ratified by Earth's 18 largest nation-states. For the first time in recorded history, the inhabitants of Earth began to see themselves as a single collective group, human as opposed to alien. The Systems Alliance military, a force dedicated to the protection and defense of Earth and its citizens against non-Terran threats, was formed soon after, drawing resources, soldiers, and officers from nearly every military organization on the planet. There were some who insisted the sudden unification of Earth's various governments into a single political entity had happened a little too quickly and conveniently. The infonets were swarming with theories, claiming the Mars bunker had actually been discovered long before it was publicly announced. The report of the mining team unearthing it was just a well-timed cover story. The formation of the Alliance, they asserted, was in fact the final stage of a long and complicated series of secret international treaties and clandestine backroom deals that had taken years or even decades to negotiate. Public opinion generally dismissed such talk as conspiracy theory paranoia. Most people preferred the idealistic notion that the revelation was a catalyst that energized the governments and citizens of the world, driving them boldly forward into a brave new age of cooperation and mutual respect. Grissom was too jaded to fully buy into that fantasy. Privately, he couldn't help but wonder if the politicians had known more than they publicly admitted. Even now, he had wondered if the communications drone carrying the distress call from Shang-Chi had caught them by surprise, or had they been expecting something like this even before the alliance was formed. As he neared the bridge, he pushed all thoughts of alien research stations and shady conspiracies from his head. Oh, screen dimmed. Fix that. He was a practical man. The details behind the discovery of the bunker and the formation of the Alliance didn't really matter to him. The Alliance was sworn to protect and defend humanity throughout the stars, and everyone, including Grissom, had to play their part. Okay. I'm gonna need something more substantial than water in the future for these. Anyways. Captain Eisenhorn, commanding officer of the New Delhi, gazed out through the large viewport built into the foredeck of the ship. What he saw there sent a shiver of wonder down his spine. Outside the window, the massive Arcturus space station grew steadily larger as the New Delhi approached. The Alliance fleet, nearly 200 vessels ranging from 20-man destroyers to dreadnoughts with crews of several hundred, stretched out from it in all directions, surrounding the station like an ocean of steel. The entire scene was illuminated by the orange glow emanating from the Type K red giant far in the distance, Arcturus, the system's sun for which the base had been named. The ships reflected the star's fiery glow, gleaming as if they burned through the flames of truth and triumph. Though Eisenhorn had been witness to this grand spectacle dozens of times, it never ceased to amaze him. A dazzling reminder of how far they had come in such a short time. The discovery on Mars had elevated humanity, binding them together with a new sense of singular purpose as top experts from every field had united their resources in one glorious project, an attempt to unravel the technological mysteries stored inside the alien bunker. Almost immediately, it had become apparent that the Protheans, the name given to the unknown alien species, had been far more technologically advanced than humanity, and that they had vanished long ago. Most estimates placed the find at nearly 50,000 years old, predating the evolution of modern man. However, the Protheans had built the station from materials unlike anything found naturally on Earth, and even the passing of 50 millennia had done little to damage the valuable treasures inside. Most remarkable were the data files the Protheans had left behind, millions of terabytes worth of knowledge, still viable, though compiled in a strange and unfamiliar language. Deciphering the contents of those data files became the holy grail of virtually every scientist on Earth. It took months of round the clock study, but eventually, the code of the Prothean language was broken, and the pieces began to fall into place. For conspiracy theorists, this was seen as fuel for their fire. It should have taken years, they argued, for anything useful to come out of the bunker, but their negativity went unheard of or unheeded by most, left behind in the wake of spectacular scientific advances. It was as if a dam had ruptured and a cascade of knowledge and discovery had been unleashed to flood the human psyche. Research that previously took decades to achieve results now seemed to require mere months. Through the adaptation of Prothean technology, humanity was able to develop mass effect fields, enabling faster than light travel. No longer were vessels bound by the harsh and unforgiving limits of the space-time continuum. Similar leaps followed in other areas: clean and efficient new energy sources, ecological and environmental advances, terraforming. Within a year, the inhabitants of Earth began a rapid spread through the solar system. Ready access to resources from the other planets, moons, and asteroids allowed colonies to be established on orbiting space stations. Massive terraforming projects began to transform the lifeless surface of Earth's own moon into a habitable environment. And Eisenhorn, like most people, didn't care to listen to those who stubbornly claimed humanity's new golden age was a carefully orchestrated sham that had actually begun decades earlier. "Officer on deck," one of the crewmen barked out. The sound of the entire bridge staff standing to salute the new arrival told Captain Eisenhorn who it was before he even turned around. Admiral John Grissom was a man who commanded respect. Serious and stern, there was a gravity about him, an undeniable significance in his mere presence. "I'm surprised you're here," Eisenhorn said under his breath, turning back to gaze once more at the scene outside the window as Grissom crossed the bridge and they took up position below him. They'd known each other for nearly 20 years, having met as raw recruits during basic training with the United States Marine Corps before the Alliance even existed. "Aren't you the one who's always saying the viewports are a tactical weakness on Alliance ships?" Eisenhorn added. "Have to do my part for the morale of the crew," Grissom whispered back. "Figured I could help reinforce the glory of the Alliance if I came up here and stared out into the fleet all wistful and misty-eyed like you." "Tact is the art of making a point without making an enemy," Eisenhorn admonished him. Sir Isaac Newton said that. "I don't have any enemies," Grissom muttered. "I'm a goddamned hero, remember?" Eisenhorn considered Grissom a friend, but that didn't change the fact that he was a difficult man to like. Professionally, the Admiral projected the perfect image for an Alliance officer: smart, tough, and demanding. On duty, he carried himself with an air of fierce purpose, unshakable confidence, and absolute authority that inspired loyalty and devotion in his troops. On a personal level, however, he could be moody and sullen. Things had only gotten worse once he'd been so visibly thrust into the public eye as an icon representing the entire Alliance. Years of being in the spotlight had seemingly transformed his harsh pragmatism into cynical pessimism. Eisenhorn had expected him to be sour on this trip. The Admiral was never a fan of those kinds of public performances, but Grissom's mood had been particularly dark even for him, and the captain was beginning to wonder if there was something more going on. "You're not just here to speak to the graduating class, are you?" Eisenhorn asked, keeping his voice low. "Need to know basis," Grissom said curtly, just loud enough for the captain to hear. "You don't need to know." After a second, he added, "You don't want to know." The two officers shared a minute of silence, simply staring out the viewport at the approaching station. "Admit it," Eisenhorn said, hoping to dispel the other man's bleak humor. "Seeing Arcturus surrounded by the entire Alliance fleet, it's an impressive sight." "The fleet won't look so impressive once it's spread out across a dozen star systems," Grissom countered. "Our numbers are too small, and the galaxy's too damn big." Eisenhorn had to admit that Grissom was probably more aware of that than anyone. "Hi, Addison. How are you doing?" The technology of the Protheans had catapulted human society forward hundreds of years and allowed them to conquer the solar system. That's good. But had required an even more amazing discovery to open up the vastness of space beyond their own sun. Are you reading us bedtime stories? Something like that, yeah. In 2149, a research team exploring the farthest fringes of human expansion realized that Chiron, a small satellite orbiting Pluto, wasn't really a moon at all. It was actually an enormous piece of dormant Prothean technology, a mass relay. Floating for tens of thousands of years in the cold depths of space, it had become encased in a shell of ice and frozen debris several hundred kilometers thick. Cinnamon, don't say you dream of large masses. The experts back on Earth weren't completely unprepared for this particular revelation. The existence and purpose of mass relays had been mentioned in the data archives recovered from the Mars bunker. In simplest terms, the mass relays were a network of linked gates that could transport a ship from one relay to the next, instantaneously, traversing thousands of light years. The underlying scientific theory behind the creation of the mass relays was still beyond the scope of humanity's top experts, but even though they couldn't construct one themselves, scientists were able to reactivate the dormant relay they had stumbled across. The mass relay was a door that could open up the entire galaxy, or lead right into the heart of a burning star or black hole. Exploratory probes sent through immediately dropped out of contact, not unexpectedly considering the notion that they were being instantly transported thousands of light years away. In the end, the only way to truly know what was on the other side was to send somebody through, someone willing to brave the great unknown and face whatever dangers and challenges waited on the other side. The Alliance handpicked a crew of brave men and women, soldiers willing to risk their own lives, individuals ready to make the ultimate sacrifice in the name of discovery and progress. And to lead this crew, they chose a man of unique character and unquestioned strength, one they knew would not falter in the face of untold adversity, a man named John Grissom. Upon their successful return through the mass relay, the entire crew had been hailed as heroes, but the media had chosen Grissom, the imposing, solemn commander of the mission, to become the flag-bearer of the Alliance as humanity forged ahead into a new age of unparalleled discovery and expansion. "Whatever's happened," Eisenhorn said, still hoping he could pull Grissom from his dark state of mind, "you have to believe we can deal with it. You and I never could have imagined that we could accomplish all this in such a short time." Grissom gave a snort of derision. "We couldn't have done a damn thing if it wasn't for the Protheans." Eisenhorn shook his head. While it had been the discovery and adaptation of Prothean technology that had opened up these great possibilities, it was the actions of people like Grissom that had transformed possibility into reality. "If I have seen farther, It is by standing on the shoulders of giants, Eisenhorn countered. Sir Isaac Newton said that too. Why the obsession with Newton? He a relative or something? Actually, my grandfather was tracing our family's genealogy, and he... I don't really want to know, Grissom growled, cutting him off. They were almost at their destination. The Arcturus space station dominated the entire window now, blocking out everything else. The docking bay loomed before them, a gaping hole in the gleaming hull of the station's exterior. I should go, Grissom said with a weary sigh. They'll want to see me come marching down the gangway as soon as we touch down. Take it easy on those recruits, Eisenhorn suggested, only half joking. Remember, they're barely more than kids. I didn't come here to meet with a bunch of kids, Grissom replied. I came here looking for soldiers. The first thing Grissom did when he arrived was request a private room. He was scheduled to address the entire graduating class at 1400. In the 4 hours between then and now, he planned to conduct private interviews with a handful of the recruits. The brass at Arcturus weren't expecting his request, but they did their best to accommodate it. They set him up in a small room furnished with a desk, computer workstation, and a single chair. Grissom was sitting behind the desk, reviewing the personnel files on the monitor one last time. Competition to be accepted into the N7 Specialist Training Program at Arcturus was fierce. Every recruit on the station had been handpicked from the best young men and women the Alliance had to offer, yet the handful of names on Grissom's list had distinguished themselves from the rest of the elite. Even here, they stood out from the crowd. There was a knock at the door. 2 quick, firm raps. Come in, the Admiral called out. The door slid open. Its Second Lieutenant David Edward Anderson, the first name on Grissom's list, walked in. Fresh out of training, he had already been marked for the ranks of junior officers, and looking at his file, it was easy to see why. Grissom's list was arranged alphabetically, but based on Anderson's marks at the academy and the evaluations of his training officers, his names would probably have been right at the top regardless. The lieutenant was a tall man, 6'3" according to his file. At 20 years old, he was just starting to fill out his large frame, still growing into his broad chest and wide, square shoulders. His skin was dark brown, his black hair cut high and tight in accordance with Alliance regulations. His features, like most citizens in the multicultural society of the late 22nd century, were a mix of several different racial characteristics, predominantly African, but Grissom thought he could see lingering traces of Central European and Native American ancestry as well. Anderson marched smartly across the room and stopped directly in front of the desk, standing at attention as he snapped off a formal salute. At ease, Lieutenant, Grissom ordered, instinctively returning the young salute. The young man did as he was told, relaxing his stance so that he stood with his arms clasped behind his back and his legs spread wide. Sir, he asked, if I may. Even though he was a junior officer making a request of a rear admiral, he spoke with confidence. There was no hesitation in his voice. Grissom scowled before nodding at him to continue. The file showed Anderson had been born and raised in London, but he had almost no discernible regional accent. His generic dialect was likely a product of cross-cultural exposure through e-schooling and the infonets, combined with a steady barrage of pan-global entertainment vids and music. I just want to tell you what an honor it is meeting you in person, Admiral, the young man informed him. He wasn't gushing or fawning, for which Grissom was grateful. He simply stated, as a matter of fact, I remember seeing you on the news after the Chiron expedition when I was only 12. That's when I decided I wanted to join the Alliance. Are you trying to make me feel old, son? Anderson started to smile, thinking it was a joke, but the smile withered under Grissom's glare. No, sir, he replied, his voice still sure and strong. I only meant you're an inspiration to us all. He'd expected the lieutenant to stutter and stammer out some kind of apology, but Anderson wasn't so easily rattled. Grissom made a quick note in his file. I see it says here you're married, Lieutenant. Yes, sir, she's a civilian. Lives back on Earth. I was married to a civilian, Grissom told him. We had a daughter. I haven't seen her in 12 years. Anderson was momentarily thrown off balance by the unexpected personal disclosure. I'm sorry, sir. It's hell keeping a marriage together when you're in the service, Grissom warned him. You don't think worrying about a wife back on Earth is going to make it harder when you're out on a 6-month tour? Might make it easier, sir, Anderson countered. It's nice to know I got someone back home waiting for me. There was no hint of anger in the young man's voice, but it was clear he wasn't going to be intimidated, even when speaking to a rear admiral. Grissom nodded and made another note in the file. Do you know why I scheduled this meeting, Lieutenant? He asked. After a moment of serious consideration, Anderson simply shook his head. No, sir. 12 days ago, an expedition fleet left our outpost at Shanxi. They were heading through the Shanxi Theta mass relay into an uncharted region of space, 2 cargo vessels and 3 frigates. They made contact with an alien species out there, some kind of patrol fleet, we think. Only one of our frigates made it back. Grissom had just dropped a bombshell in the young man's lap, but Anderson's expression barely changed. His only reaction was a momentary widening of his eyes. Protheans, sir? He asked, driving right to the heart of the matter. We don't think so, Grissom told him. Technologically, they seem to be on about the same level as us. How do we know that, sir? Because the ships Shanxi sent out to engage them the next day had enough firepower to wipe out their whole patrol. Anderson gasped, then took a deep breath to collect himself. Grissom didn't blame him. So far, he'd been impressed with how well the lieutenant had handled the whole situation. Any further retaliation from the aliens, sir? The kid was smart. His mind worked quickly, analyzing the situation and moving forward to the relevant question after only a few seconds. They sent reinforcements, Grissom informed him. They captured Shanxi. We don't have any other details yet. Comm satellites are down. We only got word because someone got off a message drone just before Shanxi fell. Anderson nodded to show he understood, but he didn't say anything right after. Grissom was glad to see the young man had the patience to give himself time to process the information. It was a lot to wrap one's head around. You're sending us into action, aren't you, sir? Alliance Command makes that decision, Grissom said. All I can do is advise them. That's why I'm here. I'm afraid I don't understand, Admiral. Every military engagement has only 3 options, Lieutenant. Engage, retreat, or surrender. We can't just turn our backs on Shanxi. We have to engage, Anderson exclaimed. With all due respect, sir, he added a second later, remembering who he was talking to. It's not that simple, Grissom explained. This is completely unprecedented. We've never faced an enemy like this before. We know nothing about them. If we escalate this into a war against an alien species, we have no way to predict how it will end. They could have a fleet 1,000 times the size of ours. We could be on the verge of starting a war that will culminate in the total annihilation of the human race. Grissom paused for emphasis, letting his words sink in. Do you honestly think we should take that risk, Lieutenant Anderson? You're asking me, sir? Alliance Command wants my advice before they make their decision, but I'm not going to be on the front lines fighting the war, Lieutenant. You were a squad leader during your N7 training. I want to know what you think. Do you believe our troops are ready for this? Anderson frowned, thinking long and hard before he offered his answer. Sir, I don't think we have any other choice, he said, choosing his words carefully. Retreat isn't an option. Now that the aliens know about us, they aren't just going to sit at Shanxi and do nothing. Eventually, we'll have to either engage or surrender. And you don't think surrender is an option? I don't think humanity could survive being subjugated under alien rule, Anderson replied. Freedom is worth fighting for. Even if we lose, Grissom pressed, this isn't just about what you're willing to sacrifice, soldier. We provoke them, and the war can make its way back to Earth. Think about your wife. Are you willing to risk her life for the sake of freedom? I don't know, sir, was Anderson's solemn reply. Are you willing to condemn your daughter to the life of a slave? That's the answer I was looking for, Grissom said with a sharp nod. With enough soldiers like you, Anderson, humanity just might be ready for this after all. Eight. I did. I shook the controller, Nesto. Don't worry. Look, I have a whole TV in front of me displaying the game and also the window for it on OBS. I can see when it dims. Chapter 1, 8 years later. Staff Lieutenant David Anderson, executive officer on the SSV Hastings, rolled out of his bunk at the first sound of the alarm. His body moved instinctively, conditioned by the years of active service aboard Systems Alliance space vessels. By the time his feet hit the floor, he was already awake and alert, his mind evaluating the situation. The alarm rang again, echoing off the hull to rebound throughout the entire ship. Two short blasts, repeating over and over. A general call to stations. At least they weren't under immediate attack. That would be funny. As he pulled his uniform on, Anderson ran through the possible scenarios. The Hastings was a patrol vessel on the Skyllian Verge, an isolated region on the farthest fringes of Alliance space. Their primary purpose was to protect the dozens of human colonies and research outposts scattered across the sector. A general call to stations probably meant they spotted an unauthorized vessel in Alliance territory. Either that or they were responding to a distress call. Anderson hoped it was the former. It wasn't easy getting dressed in the tight confines of the sleeping quarters he shared with two other crewmen, but he'd had lots of practice. In less than a minute, he had his uniform on, his boots secured, and was moving quickly through the narrow corridors toward the bridge, where Captain Belliard would be waiting for him. As the executive officer, it fell to Anderson to relay the captain's order to the enlisted crew, and to make sure those orders were properly carried out. Space was the most precious resource on any military vessel, and Anderson was constantly reminded of this as he encountered other crewmen heading in the opposite direction as they rushed to their assigned posts. Invariably, they would press themselves against the corridor walls in an effort to let Anderson by, snapping off awkward salutes to their superior as he squeezed past them. But despite the cramped conditions, the entire process was carried out with an efficiency and crisp precision that was the hallmark of every crew in the Alliance fleet. Anderson was almost at his destination. He was passing navigation when he noticed a pair of junior officers making rapid calculations and applying them to a three-dimensional star chart projected above their consoles. They each gave their XO a curt but respectful nod as he passed, too engrossed by their duties to be encumbered by the formality of a true salute. Anderson responded with a grim tilt of his head. He could see they were plotting a route through the nearest master relay. That meant the Hastings was responding to a distress call, and the brutal truth was that more often than not, their response came too late. In the years since the First Contact War, humanity had spread out too far and too fast. They didn't have enough ships to properly patrol a region the size of the Verge. Settlers who lived out here knew the threat of attacks and raids was all too real, and too often the Hastings touched down on a world only to find a small but thriving colony reduced to corpses, burned out buildings, and a handful of shell-shocked survivors. Anderson still hadn't found a good way to cope with being a first-hand witness to that kind of death and destruction. He'd seen action during the war, but that was different. That had been primarily ship-to-ship warfare, killing enemy combatants from tens of thousands of kilometers away. It wasn't the same as picking through the charred rubble and blackened bodies of civilians. The First Contact War, despite its name, had been a short and relatively bloodless campaign. It began in Alliance patrol inadvertently trespassed on the sentence is weird, hold on. It began when an Alliance patrol inadvertently trespassed on the territory of the Turian Empire. For humanity, it had been their first encounter with another intelligent species. For the Turians, it was an invasion by an aggressive and previously unknown race. Misunderstanding and overreaction on both sides had led to several intense battles between patrols and scout fleets, but the conflict never erupted into a full-scale planetary war. The escalating hostilities and sudden deployment of Turian fleets had drawn the attention of the greater galactic community, luckily for humanity. It turned out the Turians were only one species among a dozen, each independently but voluntarily united beneath the rule of a governing body known as the Citadel Council. Each eager to prevent interstellar war with the newly emerged humans, the Council had intervened, revealing itself to the Alliance and brokering a peaceful resolution between them and the Turians. Less than 2 months after it had begun, the First Contact War was officially over. 623 human lives have been lost. Most of the casualties were sustained in the first encounter and during the Turian attack on Shang-Chi. The Turian losses were slightly higher. The Alliance fleet sent to liberate the captured outpost had been ruthless, brutal, and very thorough, but on a galactic scale, the losses to both sides were minor. Humanity had been pulled back from the brink of a potentially devastating war and instead became the newest member of a vast interstellar pan-species society. Anderson climbed the 3 steps separating the forward deck of the bridge from the main level of the ship. Captain Belliard was hunched over a small view screen, studying a stream of incoming transmissions. He stood up straight as Anderson approached and returned his executive officer's salute with one of his own. "We've got trouble, Lieutenant. We picked up a distress call when we were linked up to the comm relays," the captain explained by way of greeting. "I was afraid of that, sir. It came from Sidon." "Sidon?" Anderson recognized the name. "Don't we have a research base there?" Belliard nodded. "A small one. 15 security personnel, 12 researchers, 6 support staff." Anderson frowned. This was no ordinary attack. Raiders preferred to hit defenseless settlements and bug out before Alliance reinforcements arrived on the scene. Sorry about that, had to sneeze. A well-defended base like Sidon wasn't their typical target. It felt more like an act of war. The Turians were allies of the Human Systems Alliance now, at least officially, and the Skyllian Verge was too far removed from Turian territory for them to get involved in any conflicts out here. But there were other species vying with humanity for control of the region. The Alliance was in direct competition with the Batarian government to establish a presence in the Verge, but so far the two rival species had managed to avoid any real violence in their confrontations. Anderson doubted they'd start with something like this. Still, there were plenty of other groups out there with the means and motives to hit an Alliance stronghold. Some of them were even made up of humans, non-affiliated terrorist organizations, and multi-species guerrilla factions eager to strike a blow against the powers that be, illegal paramilitary groups looking to stock up on high-grade weapons, independent mercenary bands hoping for one big score. "Might be helpful to know what Sidon was working on, Captain," Anderson suggested. "Their top security clearance facility," the captain replied with a shake of his head. "I can't even get schematics for the base. Never mind get anyone to tell me what they were working on." Anderson frowned. Without schematics, his team would be going in blind, giving up any tactical advantage they might have had from knowing the layout of the battleground. This mission just kept getting better and better. "What's our ETA, sir?" 46 minutes. Finally, some good news. The Hastings followed random patrol routes. It was pure chance they happened to be this close to the source of the distress call. With luck, they could still get there in time. "I'll have the ground team ready, Captain." "You always do, Lieutenant." Anderson turned to go, acknowledging his commanding officer's compliment with a simple, "Aye, aye, sir." In the black void of space, the Hastings was all but invisible to the naked eye. Surrounded by a self-generated mass effect field and traveling nearly 50 times faster than the speed of light, it was little more than a flickering blur, a slight wavering in the fabric of the space-time continuum. The vessel altered its flight path as the helmsman made a quick course correction, a minor adjustment to the trajectory that sent the ship hurtling toward the nearest mast relay, nearly 5 billion kilometers away. At the speed of nearly 15 million kilometers per second, it didn't take long before their destination was in range. 10,000 kilometers out from their target, the helmsman took the Element Zero drive core offline, disengaging the mass effect fields. Blue shifted energy waves radiated off the ship as it dropped out of FTL, igniting the darkness of space like a flare. The illumination of the blazing ship reflected off the mass relay growing steadily larger on the horizon. Although completely alien in design, the construction closely resembled an enormous gyroscope. At its center was a sphere made up of 2 concentric rings spinning around a single axis. Each ring was nearly 5 kilometers across, and two 15-kilometer arms protruded from one end of the constantly rotating metal. The entire structure sparkled and flashed with white bursts of crackling energy. At a signal from the Alliance vessel, the mass relay began to move. It turned ponderously on its axis, orienting itself with a linked relay hundreds of light years away. The Hastings picked up speed as it headed straight for the center of the enormous alien construct on a pre-calculated approach vector. The rings of this relay's heart began to spin faster, accelerating until they became nothing but a whirling blur. The sporadic bursts of energy emanating from its core became a solid pulsing glow, growing in strength and intensity until it was almost impossible to look at. The Hastings was less than 500 kilometers away when the relay fired. A discharge of dark energy swept out from the spinning rings like a wave, engulfing the ship. It shimmered momentarily, then disappeared as if snuffed out of existence. Instantaneously, it winked back into reality 1,000 light years from its previous location, emerging from apparent nothingness with a bright blue flash in the vicinity of a completely different mass relay. The drive core of the Hastings roared to life and it jumped to FTL, vanishing into the darkness with a red-shifted burst of heat and radiation. Rapidly left behind, the receiving relay began to power down. The rings at its center began decelerating. We've cleared the mass relay, engaging drive core, ETA to Cedon 26 minutes. Hauled in the cargo hold with the other 4 members of the ground team, it was almost impossible to hear the sound of the voice coming over the shipboard intercom above the roaring of the engines. Not that Anderson needed to hear the updates to know what was happening. His stomach was still churning from the jump through the mass relay. Scientifically, he knew the motion sickness shouldn't happen. Travel between relays, the jump from an originating or transmitting relay to the destination or receiving relay, was an instantaneous event. It took no time to occur. Therefore, it couldn't possibly have any physical effect on his body. But while he acknowledged this theoretical fact, Anderson knew from first-hand experience it wasn't true in practice. Maybe this time the tightness in his gut was just a bad feeling about what they'd find when they reached the Cedon facility. Whoever had attacked the research base had been willing to take on 15 Alliance Marines. Even using the element of surprise to their advantage, they must have been a formidable force. The Alliance should be sending a troop transport in as reinforcements, not a patrol frigate that could only assemble a 5-person ground team. But nobody else was close enough to answer to the stress call in time, and most Alliance vessels were too big to go planet-side anyway. The Hastings was small enough to enter a world's atmosphere and touch down on its surface, and still be able to take off again. Anything bigger than a frigate would have to ferry troops down using shuttles or dropships, and they didn't have the time for that. At least they were going in heavy. Every member of the ground team was wearing body armor equipped with fully charged kinetic shield generators, as well as 3/4 visored headgear. They each carried a half-dozen grenades and the Alliance's standard-issue Han Keter G912 assault rifle. The ammo clip on each weapon held over 4,000 rounds, miniature pellets smaller than grain of sand. When fired at sufficient velocity, the nearly microscopic projectiles were capable of inflicting massive damage. That was the real problem. No matter how advanced defensive technology got, it was always a step behind. The Alliance spared no expense when it came to protecting its soldiers. Their body armor was top of the line, and their kinetic shields were the latest military prototype. But it still wasn't enough to withstand a direct hit from close range with heavy weapons. If they were going to survive this mission, it wasn't going to be because of their equipment. It always came down to two things: training and leadership. Their lives were in Anderson's hands now, and he could sense their unease. Alliance Marines were well trained to deal with the mental and physical stress of the human body's natural fight-or-flight instincts, but this was more than the normal adrenaline rush of impending combat. He had been careful not to expose his own doubts. He'd projected an image of absolute confidence and composure, but the members of his team were smart enough to figure things out on their own. They could put the pieces together just as he had. Like the lieutenant, they knew ordinary raiders wouldn't attack a heavily defended Alliance base. Anderson didn't believe in giving motivational speeches. They were all professionals here. But even for Alliance soldiers, those last nervous minutes before a mission were harder to endure in total silence. Besides, there was no sense hiding from the truth. Everyone stay sharp, he said, knowing the rest of the team could hear him clearly over the rumblings of the engines through the radios in their helmets. I get the feeling this wasn't just some slavers pulling a quick grab and run. Batarian, sir? The question came from Gunnery Chief Jill Daw, a year older than Anderson. She'd already been an Alliance Marine on active duty back when he was still taking N7 training at Arcturus. They'd served in the same unit during the First Contact War. She stood just over 6'3", making her taller than most of the men she served with. She was stronger than a lot of them too, judging by her wide shoulders, the well-defined muscles of her arms, and her generally large but not ill-proportioned frame. Ooh, unfortunately I don't have Marathon, so I can't exactly play it either. But I hope you end up enjoying it if you play it. Some of the other soldiers in the unit had called her Amy, short for Amazon, but never to her face. And when the fighting started, they were all glad to have her on their side. I will do just that. Anderson liked Daw, but she had a habit of rubbing people the wrong way. She didn't believe in diplomacy. If she had an opinion, she let everyone know it, which probably explained why she was still a non-commissioned officer. Still, the lieutenant realized that if she asked a question, it meant most of the others were probably wondering the same thing. Let's not jump to any conclusions, Chief. Any idea what they were working on over at Sidon? This time it was Corporal Ahmed O'Reilly, technicians expert, asking the questions. Classified, that's all I know. So be ready for anything. The other two members of the team, Private Second Class Indigo Lee and Private First Class Dan Shea, didn't bother to comment, and the team lapsed once more into an uneasy silence. Nobody felt good about the mission, but Anderson knew they'd follow his lead. He'd brought them through that fire enough times to earn their trust. Approaching Sidon, the intercom crackled. No response on any frequencies. This was grim news. If any Alliance personnel were still alive inside the base, they should have answered the Hastings call. Anderson slammed his visor down to shield his face, and the rest of the crew followed suit. A minute later, they felt the turbulence of the ship as the ship entered the tiny planet's atmosphere. At a nod from Anderson, his team made a final weapons, comm, and shields check. We have a visual on the base, the intercom crackled. No ships on the ground, and we're not picking up any Alliance vessels in the vicinity. Damn cowards already cut and ran, Anderson heard Dom mutter over the radio in his helmet. With the Hastings' quick response time, Anderson had been hoping they'd arrive to catch the enemy in the act, but he wasn't really surprised there were no other ships in the area. A raid against a target as well defended as Sidon would have required at least 3 vessels working together. The 2 larger ships would land on the surface and unload assault teams, while a small scout vessel would stay in orbit, monitoring the nearby mass relay for any signs of activity. The scout must have seen it spring to life as the Hastings approached the connecting relay on the far side of the region and radioed the ships on the ground. The advance warning would have given just enough time to lift off, clear the planet's atmosphere, and engage their FTL drives before the Hastings arrived. The ships involved in the attack on the base were long gone, but with their hurried escape, they might have been forced to leave some of their troops behind. A few seconds later, there was a heavy thump as the ship touched down at the landing port at the Sidon Research Facility. The interminable waiting was over. The pressure door at the Hastings cargo hold hissed open, and the gangway ramp descended. "Ground team," came Captain Belliard's voice over the intercom. "You are cleared to go." With that, though, we are actually going to end the stream here. I know this was a very short stream for today, especially just for me reading a book. I would have loved to make more progress than 1 chapter and the prologue, but that's what happens when you sleep in until like 2 p.m. You end up with very short streams. I really need to stop doing that. Anyways, thank you for everyone who showed up, and I will see you tomorrow for Let's see, tomorrow's Monday, so Military Monday, when we play more Call of Duty. You overslept for your stream yesterday too? Yeah, I definitely need to work on that and not do it. But yeah, I will hopefully see everyone tomorrow. Bye, everyone.